Hi, I'm John Atack.
I'm Ursula Wake.
Who's my guest today. And we're introducing another channel called Lyrical Whacks.
Mm-hmm.
And we basically both write and decided that there needs to be a decent channel about new writing and old writing and how to write and why to write and that kind of thing. Our subject matter will be lyrical. It will be poetry, and that word kind of evokes a chill because at school it was something that was rammed down our throats. I was lucky in that I liked some of it. Poetry was about the only. I like the Shakespeare as well, actually. I just like the beauty of the words, but it was as if the school system is absolutely determined to put people off. You know, just about everything, actually, just about every subject.
You're not allowed to just enjoy it, are you?
No.
Oh, no.
It'd be sinful, bad. And maybe that harks back to our school systems all having been formed out of Christian principles, that we wouldn't want.
Possibly.
There's a certain Puritanism. So to introduce the notion of what we mean by poetry, we mean the interesting stuff. We don't mean the boring rubbish. So this is a poem by Richard Brautigan, one of my favourite writers, and it's called The Memoirs of Jesse James. I remember all those thousands of hours that I spent in grade school watching the clock, waiting for recess or lunch or to go home, waiting for anything but school. My teachers could easily have ridden with Jesse James for all the time they stole from me.
That's a really good summary of poetry and school, isn't it?
It is. And you brought to my attention what Samuel Taylor Coleridge said about poetry, which was
that poetry is the best words in the best order, and that's all it is.
It's just good writing. It's just being articulate and saying something in a way that explains what you're talking about, gets somebody to perhaps think about something they haven't thought about before, and says so in a somewhat musical way, let's say, that the words fit together in a...
And sometimes it's just about the sound itself for some people, isn't it? And so a lot of nonsense poetry, there's the sound of it, and people enjoy that. We all enjoy words and the musicality of words and the or the meaning of them. Yeah, we all enjoy them. And we know some good things, don't we, about some good words.
We do.
In the good order.
I mean, you have the work that Sprite Milligan was doing, like the Yin Tong song. Yin Tong, Yin Tong, Yin Tong, Yin Tong, Yin Tong, diddle I purr. That it just breaks down into sound that somehow you can't get out of your head. And he wrote some amusing poetry along the way. He did say that he thought that he would be remembered as a great poet. Which reminds me of one of his poems, which was, "My uncle was a great man. He told me so himself. He said, I am a great man." Which is a lovely poem.
Milligan also wrote some serious poetry as well.
He did?
Yeah.
And the tremendous novel Cocoon, which I regard as a great work of literature, which is comic. It's got, who wrote me these knees in it?
Oh.
And the character in the book is Milligan. So he wrote his own knees. And he doesn't like them. You went off and looked to see, how well podcasts about poetry were doing, and how well were they doing?
Not very well, John. That's how they were doing. Because we'd had an idea of doing, we both liked the idea of doing a poetry podcast, because being both very wordy people, I'm not quite as wordy as John.
It's not true. It's not true.
We are word...
Count the words drenched. At the end of this.
You describe as word-sodden people. Yes. So, and we both write poetry, we both read a lot of poetry, we like talking about poetry to each other. So we both liked the idea of doing a podcast. So I just did a bit of a scout round, and they're really not getting much traction. People are doing some good quality podcasts and some and putting a lot of effort in. to some of them, but they're just not getting the subscribers, the interest, the comments. So you had the thought of not using the word poetry.
Yeah, I think it's a kind of stultifying word. There's a poetic word. That, a stagnant word, a word that evokes horror. And because I've spent a lifetime studying public relations and criticising it, it was very evident to me that we have to rebrand. We have to find some way of bringing it to people's attention that our lives are full of poetry, but largely through song, largely through the form of song. So, hello darkness, my old friend, I've come to talk to you again, because the vision's slowly creeping. That we accept that sort of poetry, or John Lennon's strange idea that he was in fact a walrus, and the people around him were eggmen. I wonder what he was taking. That's, we all know hundreds and hundreds of poems because we know them as lyrics. So the thought was to sort of rebrand. It fascinated me. Faber and Faber, who are probably the most famous poetry house in the world, they had, I think it was 86 subscribers on their podcast.
Something like 80-something subscribers. Yeah, so there's some barrier there, because like you say, people love words. People love the lyrics of songs, not just the music of songs. And a lot of poems, and we've all got some in our head somewhere. So yeah, just let's just shift the wording a bit. Hence, Lyrical Whacks. So it will be weekly. We will be coming to you weekly. We'll be looking at poets and lyricists, some really famous, some less famous.
Some infamous.
Absolutely,
the
some infamous.
Rochester, for example.
Earl of Rochester, one of my favourites, genuinely. Crossing all continents, hopefully. Not sure about Antarctica, but we'll still be working on that.
If we can find any penguin poets, they will be with
let us know. Let us know if there's anybody we're missing in Antarctica. Many centuries. So we'll be trying to cover as many people as possible, both poets and lyricists, like I say. So, and yeah, another thread to it, John.
We will be reading from our own work, which will be some of it about our own love affair these last few splendid months, and some of it our other poetry about other things. We'll be talking about writing. I've been writing since I was 13 years old. I've published a fair few books. I don't know how many books anymore. I've written 9 novels, and 2 of those are published and 2 of them are ready for publication. I've written thousands of poems, and it's the water I swim in. It's just a normal thing. I don't really think of writing as therapy. I know for many people it helps them therapeutically to express themselves. I think of it as more like breathing. The thought pops into my head and I have to switch the light back on and write down this thing and confine it then to a book. We'll be talking about how we write, why we write, what we know about writing, and about the inspiration for writing, and encouraging people to write themselves, because self-expression, whether it's a part of therapy or not, I think it's a part of good health to be able to express yourself and get your thoughts out there. And you often, I found it when I was revising my novel Voodoo Child's Slight Return, that there were things I'd said that I didn't realise I'd said. That you go, oh yes, that's quite interesting.
That is a beautiful moment. I love that. You look back at something you've written and you think, I have no idea where that came from. That is inspiration. And it's a beautiful, satisfying moment. Because then they're always good bits, aren't they?
Yeah.
Those bits that you can't think where it came from, they're never the poor quality bits. So we'll be looking at people such as, to give you a few examples over the next few months, We will be bringing you Emily Dickinson, Guy Garvey, Charles Causley, Wole Soyinka, Richard Brautigan, Laura Marling, Pablo Neruda, Imtiaz Darker, Tom Waits, Paul Simon, Rumi. And on that note,
Yes.
I'm going to read a poem by Rumi, which I really, really enjoy.
There'll be a little bit of Radiohead as well, and some Joni Mitchell.
Possibly, there'll be all sorts of people
sorts
over the
and the Earl of Rochester,
years.
of course.
Have I converted you to the Earl of Rochester?
Not yet,
Brilliant,
no.
Brilliant.
He was rude.
Oh, he absolutely was. He was good as that. Anyway.
Yeah.
So, yes. So one of the people we'll be bringing you is Rumi, and this is one of his poems. It's called Has Anyone Seen the Boy? Has anyone seen the boy who used to come here? Round-faced troublemaker, quick to find a joke, slow to be serious, red shirt, perfect coordination, sly, strong-muscled, with things always in his pocket, reed flute, worn pick, polished and ready for his talent. You know that one. Have you heard stories about him? Pharaoh and the whole Egyptian world collapsed for such a Joseph. I'd gladly spend years getting word of him, even third or fourth hand. When I first saw that and saw who it was from, I read the poem before realising who it was by, and I was thinking of it as 20th century, possibly could be 21st century, but it's Rumi who lived
13th century.
13th century. Just staggering. To me, that is absolutely staggering, the style of it and the clarity. And there's none of the, I think people worry that old poetry is going to be very hard to understand. But that could not be clearer. And I love the sort of different tones in it somehow. And one of the things you were saying about what is it that you particularly like about Rumi?
Well, it's a comparison with Shakespeare that Shakespeare is the great genius of English literature. He doesn't have any competition, the bard, but he's a little bit miserable at times, and murderous, and tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow and the day after. And Rumi is, for me, is like the optimistic version of Shakespeare. He wrote a tremendous amount. Only about 10% of his work has been translated into English. It is said that he is the biggest selling poet in America, which
is interesting, isn't it?
Given the anti-Islamic terrible feeling that there is there, the idea that this poet, who was a Sufi mystic, he's a teacher of mysticism, that his poetry should be that popular because it is that straightforward. He's also bawdy. He has no limits in what he will write about. You can't think of it as religious poetry, that's for sure. And he addresses everyday concerns and gives insight.
And I think in this poem, there's insight in that positive thing, like you say, he's that optimism, and he can see something positive in things that other people may not think of as positive. So this child who he's describing is somebody, that round-faced troublemaker, the kind who, if you're not that person, somebody who is that person, and you remember them from school and the amount of times they got into trouble, and maybe rightly so, etc., etc.
And their brothers tried to bury them alive.
Yeah. But here's somebody who's finding the positive. Actually, very often we warm to those people as well. And Pharaoh and the whole Egyptian world collapsed for such a Joseph. We want those people in the world. So, yeah, that intense, perhaps intense is the wrong word, but intense optimism and the ability to find something positive and unexpectedly positive in situations, and to help you think about things and people from a different angle. Love it. Love that aspect of Rumi.
Yeah, Wonderful, wonderful work. He also said, lovers don't meet, they're in each other from the start, which is an interesting mystical thought and worth thinking about. When I was at school, as I said, there were some poems that I loved. I can remember the first play we did when I was at secondary school, so when I was 11, was Romeo and Juliet. And I could see all the other kids falling asleep. And I was just captivated. I didn't understand why I had to murder the two 14-year-olds at the end. That seemed a bit disheartening. But that's Shakespeare, you know. Maybe he was trying to teach us something, I don't know. Probably not. I don't think that great literature, I think it transcends trying to teach us anything. It teaches us something, but that's not its intention somehow. But one of the poems that really impressed me, that we did do at school, and I'd just like to explain that I failed my English literature exam with the next to lowest grade possible the first time I took it. And when I retook it, I failed it with the lowest grade possible, suggesting that I couldn't even spell my own name properly. And I then went on to become a poet and novelist, and I very much doubt that anybody else who did the course did. So that Stephen Fry said the same thing. He was asked whether his talent as a writer had been spotted in the very expensive school he went to, and he laughed and said, no, it was the child who used the word verdant. But this was a poem that stayed with me, and I went on to read a great many poems by its author, Charles Causley. Causley was a Cornishman. He served in the Navy during World War II. And although he didn't see action, many of his friends were lost during the sea battles. And he wrote remarkable poetry about that. He is unusual in his generation because William Carlos Williams, the poet, had declared that rhyming poetry is dead. And it has no place, which is a silly idea. But Causley occasionally wrote in free or blank verse, but for the most part wrote very elegant rhymed poetry. And I think this is a beautiful example. This is called Timothy Winters. Timothy Winters comes to school with eyes as wide as a football pool, ears like bombs and teeth like splinters. A blitz of a boy is Timothy Winters. I should actually stop and go back to the beginning here, because it needs to be explained what a football pool is before we read this. It'd be well known to anybody of my generation who in Britain, in the UK, a football pool is where you every week predict the scores of all the soccer matches, and if you get it right, you win quite a lot of money. It's almost completely lost now, with all sorts of other lotteries have taken over on it. But it used to be the major form of gambling in Britain. Many people did the pools. So that's what a football pool is for those who didn't live through that era in Britain or the United Kingdom. So, Timothy Winters. Timothy Winters comes to school with eyes as wide as a football pool, ears like bombs and teeth like splinters. A blitz of a boy is Timothy Winters. His belly is white, his neck is dark, and his hair is an exclamation mark. His clothes are enough to scare a crow, and through his breeches the blue winds blow. When teacher talks, he won't hear a word, and he shoots down dead the arithmetic bird. He licks the patterns off his plate, and he's not even heard of the welfare state. Timothy Winters has bloody feet, and he lives in a house on Suez Street. He sleeps in a sack on the kitchen floor, and they say there aren't boys like him anymore. Old man Winters likes his beer, and his missus ran off with a bombardier. Grandma sits in the grate with a gin, and Timothy's dosed with an aspirin. The welfare worker lies awake, but the law's as tricky as a 10-foot snake. So Timothy Winters drinks his cup and slowly goes on growing up. At morning prayers, the master helves for children less fortunate than ourselves, and the loudest response in the room is when Timothy Winters roars, "Amen!" So come one angel, come on 10. Timothy Winters says, "Amen, amen, 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 amen. Timothy Winters, Lord, amen." imagine that Charles Causley, this is a real piece because Causley was a school teacher and saw children who were deprived. Yeah. So we will be discussing lyrics as poetry, and so we move on to Björk, a hyper ballad. Or Bjork, as some people, or Bjork, as one might say. I think Björk is as close as I can get to it.
Yeah, we'll be calling her Björk. So moving on from a very moving but very sad poem onto something with a very different tone. So a couple of things to say about lyrics. So John and I don't see a particular necessary difference between lyrics and poetry, as we've sort of indicated already. But of course, one thing that happens in a lot of songs is you get a chorus that is then repeated several times. And to me, that one of the functions of that is that it becomes, the repeated chorus becomes part of the musical soundscape. So sometimes when I'm reading out a lyric, personally, I'll be taking out the repetition.
Me too. Me too.
And one of the tiny point that sometimes in a written version of lyrics, there will be a slight word or so that's different from what you hear in the sung version. So I personally may choose one or the other, and ask for forgiveness if people get annoyed by that. So this is a song, the lyrics to a song called Hyper Ballad by Björk. We live on a mountain right at the top. There's a beautiful view from the top of the mountain. Every morning I walk towards the edge and throw little things off, like car parts, bottles and cutlery, or whatever I find lying around. It's become a habit, a way to start the day. I go through all this before you wake up, so I can feel happier to be safe up here with you. It's real early morning, no one is awake. I'm back at my cliff, still throwing things off. I listen to the sounds they make on their way down. I follow with my eyes till they crash. Imagine what my body would sound like slamming against those rocks. When it lands, will my eyes be closed or open? I go through all this before you wake up, so I can feel happier to be safe up here with you. Safe up here with you. I really like that. I like a lot of Björk's lyrics, certainly from the 90s. And I really like this because I can relate a lot to the idea that you've got this wonderful life. It sounds like an idyllic life, but there's something in you that wants something a little bit different. And you don't want to disturb the wonderful life, but the idea of going and throwing cutlery and loud clanging things off the cliff, and then you can just go back and have a wonderful day with your partner. I can kind of relate a little bit to that. So I've never taken a car apart to throw off a mountain, but
yeah. But as you wake earlier than I do,
who knows what I'm doing? That's a point.
I think Björk's lyrics are very poignant. She was an art student. She's one of that majority in the pop world who actually went to art college and came up with the Sugar Cubes, originally. And who talked a lot about Dadaism and things in their interviews. And she broke away and created this very new way of looking at music, I think, which comes through, I'd say, pagan poetry as well, where she's willing to talk about the ferocious emotions that she feels.
Yes.
And does so often in a musically. You know, the various music boxes she had built and the percussionist she had. You see a gig where there's a guy walking in gravel to get that noise, you know.
Yeah.
So we will be talking about pop songs, about all good writing. And we're very happy to have suggestions for that.
Writing.
But This will be on the Lyrical Whacks channel, and we hope to put something up weekly on that channel. And we hope that you'll join us there, because we're desperate to get more than the 86 subscribers that Faber and Faber managed to get. I mean, T.S. Eliot and Pete Townsend of The Who were both the heads of poetry at this company, and they can only get 86. We're heading for 87 subscribers, so please.
And if you are the 87th subscriber, then maybe we'll send you something in the post.
Yeah. There's one further comment, which is we watched the thing where Simon Armitage, who's the poet laureate here, which means he basically writes poetry for the royal family. But he said that songs are different, that lyrics are different, because you always think of the music when you think of them. And then he read out a series of poems, all of which were rhymed, 2 of which he said were songs himself. And it made me stop and think about Peter Sellers, who in the 60s read out Beatles lyrics. The one I remember is, "It's been a hard day's night, and I've been working like a dog. It's been a hard day's night. I should be sleeping like a log. But when I get home to you, I find the things that you do will make me feel all right." Showing, I mean, Stanley Kubrick
You've
said...
got a very good voice for that.
Thank you. Lots of practice. I actually, as a small boy, the first time I had to do voices, I was 6. My brothers were doing a programme that they were recording. They'd got a tape recorder, and before cassette players or any of that, and they wanted to do their own version of Around the Horn with Kenneth Horne, but they couldn't do the voices. And I ended up at 6 years old. I remember them having me do Kenneth Horne, who had a baritone sort of voice, and it's never stopped since, basically. So Stanley Kubrick said that Peter Sellers was the greatest actor in the world because he could become anyone. And certainly in that wonderful comedy approach, the way that he takes a lyric and then turns it into something else, showing that Simon Armitage may not be completely right, that the words can stand alone. Because there was no point during that I thought about the music of Hard Day's Night. I don't know about you. So every week, join us weekly on Lyrical Whacks. I'm John Atack.
I'm Ursula Wake. Thank you.
Thanks so much for your time. See you again next time.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.